Hey guys, tonight we journey into the dawn of human flight dreams. Imagine yourself lying under a wide, star studded sky, the cool breeze brushing softly against your face as your mind floats upward, beyond the trees, past the hills, and into the vast, inviting blue. You feel the tug of ancient dreams stirring inside you, the irresistible desire to soar, to leave the earth behind, and to see the world from a bird's eye view. This longing isn't new. It's as old as human imagination itself. But you probably won't survive this flight if you attempt it without the technology and knowledge we have now. Still, it's worth exploring where it all began. Long before the first hot air balloon lifted into the sky, myths and stories about humans flying pepper the pages of history. You've heard of Icarus, the guy with wax wings who flew too close to the sun and ended up taking a spectacular plunge into the sea. His story is part cautionary tale, part testament to our fascination with flight. But even beyond Greek mythology, cultures across the world spun tales about humans or gods soaring through the air, sometimes on giant birds, sometimes with magical objects. Ancient Chinese legends tell of flying chariots and immortals who rode clouds. The Aztecs dreamed of feathered serpents that could take to the skies. It's as if everywhere humans imagined defying gravity long before they understood it. Historians still argue whether these myths served as blueprints for early flying devices or if they were simply metaphorical reflections of human aspiration. But what's clear is that flight occupied a vivid place in human consciousness. You might think of flight as a purely modern achievement, but the urge to conquer the sky has been around for millennia. What's intriguing is how those dreams gradually morphed from fantasy to experimentation. By the Middle Ages, inventors and scholars started documenting ideas about flight. Leonardo da Vinci sketched ornithopters, machines meant to flap like birds' wings, and studied the aerodynamics of birds with astonishing insight for his time. Although none of his designs actually flew, they laid the groundwork for understanding what it might take to get off the ground. But getting airborne without engines or modern materials? That's where things got tricky. You see, for centuries, flight remained largely in the realm of imagination and failed contraptions. Human muscles alone just don't cut it. Remember that poor guy with wings strapped on who jumped off a cliff? Gravity is relentless, and even today, that simple force demands respect. Still, those early thinkers noticed something else. Hot air rises. You might take that for granted now, but back then, it was a crucial observation. When you boil water in a kettle and see steam swirl upward, that's hot air lighter than the cooler atmosphere around it. If only you could harness that upward push on a bigger scale, you might actually float. This idea of using heated air would simmer quietly in the background of scientific inquiry for centuries. In fact, the word pneumatic, meaning related to air or gases, comes from ancient Greek, hinting at a long tradition of studying invisible forces that fill the world around us. But it wasn't until the 17th century that experimenters began to get serious. Before the Montgolfier brothers, who you'll meet soon, there were natural philosophers trying to understand gases, pressure, and buoyancy. Thinkers like Robert Boyle, famous for Boyle's law about gas pressure and volume, laid essential groundwork. They showed that air isn't just empty space, but has weight and properties you can measure and manipulate. Interestingly, some of these early scientists dabbled in ideas bordering on the fringe. There were rumors of flying devices powered by ether, a mysterious substance thought to fill the heavens, and others believed in a universal fluid that could lift objects if tapped just right. While modern science has since debunked such theories, they reveal the atmosphere of curiosity and wild speculation swirling around flight. Meanwhile, ordinary folks, farmers, craftsmen, tinkerers, watch the skies with wonder. They noticed birds gliding effortlessly, kites soaring, and balloons made of paper floating on the wind during festivals in Asia. These observations would later feed into the practical experiments that transformed hot air flight from dream to reality. So tonight, as you settle in, think of yourself as part of that long chain of dreamers and thinkers, stretching back to myth and moving through centuries of trial, error, and hope. We'll soon dive into the story of the Montgolfier brothers, who turned the simple observation of hot air rising into the first successful human-carrying flight. But for now, rest with the knowledge that your desire to fly has ancient roots, tangled in myth and shaped by the endless human quest to touch the sky. You pick up the thread where ancient dreams meet the slow grind of science, moving now into the 17th century, a time when curiosity was a blazing fire, and the natural world was getting dissected piece by piece like a complicated clock. It's a period buzzing with thinkers, experimenters, and philosophers trying to understand the invisible forces that surround us. You can almost feel the smoky candlelight in dusty libraries, the scribbling of quills, and the occasional exasperated sigh when experiments didn't go as planned. You're standing among these pioneers, witnessing their attempts to make sense of air and gases. It wasn't obvious to everyone that air had weight or could exert pressure. After all, you can't see it and it seems so light. But early scientists were starting to catch on, thanks to some clever experiments. Robert Boyle, the famous Irish chemist, nailed down what we now call Boyle's law, showing that gas volume decreases as pressure increases, and vice versa. He was basically telling everyone, hey, air isn't just nothing, it behaves predictably. This was huge because it gave a scientific handle on something invisible. At the same time, other experimenters were poking at air's mysterious qualities. Otto von Guericke, a German physicist, built the first vacuum pump in 1650 and famously demonstrated air pressure's strength by making two massive hemispheres stick together so tightly that horses couldn't pull them apart. Imagine that, air holding things together like an invisible glue. It was a mind-blowing moment, hinting that this empty space around us was anything but empty. Now, you might wonder how this all connects to balloons and human flight. The key insight was buoyancy, how objects less dense than air can float. People knew about hot air rising since the Romans, but by the 1600s this idea began to be quantified and explored seriously. Some experimented with light gases like hydrogen, which is even lighter than air, but that would come a bit later. There was also a lot of wandering into the fringe. Some scientists and inventors believed in substances like phlogiston, a mysterious element thought to be released during combustion, or ether, an invisible medium filling space. Though these ideas turned out to be wrong, they shaped the conversations and experiments of the time. Historians still argue whether these beliefs helped or hindered scientific progress, but they certainly added a quirky flavor to the scientific stew. Amid all this, there was a budding idea. If you could trap hot air or a light gas in some kind of bag or balloon, you could lift objects or even people off the ground. This wasn't yet practical, but the concept took root. Imagine the excitement when people first realized that fire, which normally destroys things, might actually help lift them into the sky. What's often overlooked is how much trial and error filled this period. People tested all sorts of materials, silk, linen, paper, to hold heated air or gas. Some balloons exploded, others deflated quickly, and many experiments ended in embarrassing failures. Yet the persistent tinkering laid the groundwork for what was to come. Meanwhile, the cultural backdrop of the 17th century was primed for breakthroughs. The Renaissance had rekindled interest in exploration and discovery, and monarchs often funded scientific endeavors for prestige and power. In France, where the Montgolfier brothers would soon make their mark, a wave of scientific societies and salons nurtured ideas about air and flight. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some early experiments involved filling animal bladders with gas and attaching them to small figures or dolls, then releasing them to see if they floated. These tests were part scientific curiosity, part carnival showmanship. People loved a good spectacle, even if the science was shaky. So you're now floating in a time when science was breaking free from superstition, but hadn't yet nailed down the laws that make balloons work. It's a patchwork of careful measurement and wild guesses, of successes and spectacular failures. The stage was being set for the Montgolfier brothers, whose simple but brilliant insight about heated air would turn this patchwork into a soaring reality. Remember how we said hot air rises? Well, these 17th century experiments helped prove why and how, but the big leap from theory to practice was still ahead. You're in the right century to catch the very first sparks that would soon ignite the dream of human flight. Now, you're stepping into the warm, paper-scented workshop of the Montgolfier brothers, Joseph and Etienne, in late 18th century France. Picture the year 1782, a cozy paper-making factory nestled in Annonay, surrounded by rolling hills and the hum of machinery. The Montgolfier family, known for their paper-making business, didn't just see trees turned into sheets, they were on the verge of turning hot air into something magical. Joseph and Etienne weren't just factory heirs, they were tinkers, thinkers, and dreamers wrapped in practicality. Their background in papermaking gave them unique insight into materials, lightweight, flexible, and yet surprisingly strong fabrics. They noticed how heat caused paper to warp and how smoke from the factory fires curled upward, riding unseen currents of warm air. It was an accidental observation that sparked a revolutionary idea. One evening, Joseph watched the smoke swirl and thought, what if that rising hot air could lift a bag, a balloon, into the sky? So they started experimenting, crafting lightweight bags from paper and fabric, and using a small fire beneath them to heat the air inside. The result? The balloon lifted. Not far or high at first, but enough to convince them they were onto something. This leap from observation to experiment was something extraordinary. They'd taken a simple natural phenomenon and begun harnessing it. Their tests weren't exactly smooth. Early balloons tore, caught fire, or fell with a sad thud. But the brothers persisted, tweaking materials and sizes. Historians still argue whether it was Etienne's engineering skills or Joseph's imaginative spark that truly propelled their success. But together they made a formidable team. A quirky detail here. Their first balloons were sometimes made using leftover paper from the family mill, often decorated with floral patterns and the occasional royal emblem. Imagine watching a beautiful patterned balloon rise above the French countryside, both a scientific experiment and an accidental art show. These early flights were as much about showmanship as science. The Montgolfiers also realized fire was both friend and foe. Heat was necessary to lift the balloon, but too much risked burning the fragile paper. They had to strike a delicate balance, a feat of trial, error, and sometimes sheer luck. Some tests ended in small fires that spread in the workshop, much to their mother's horror. Beyond their workshop, word began to spread. Local villagers gathered to watch these strange floating bags, and the brothers' balloon experiments became a curious blend of science and spectacle. The Montgolfiers' paper-making skills gave them a practical advantage no one else had, but it was their vision that transformed a simple rising smoke plume into the first steps toward manned flight. And here's a historical twist. While Joseph and Etienne were making their strides in Annonay, others in Europe were experimenting with hydrogen gas balloons. These invisible, lighter-than-air gases promised different possibilities, but the Montgolfiers' hot air approach was simpler, cheaper, and closer to a sustainable flight solution for their time. This period also ignited a debate among scholars. Was the Montgolfiers' invention primarily a product of scientific method, or was it a lucky accident fueled by their craft knowledge? Some historians argue that many incremental discoveries paved the way, and the brothers were just the lucky last step. Others see their insight as uniquely innovative. What's undeniable is that the Montgolfier brothers took the first practical step in human flight, moving beyond theory and gas experiments to a fiery, tangible reality. Their workshops became the birthplace of an idea that would soon captivate the world and lift humans toward the skies for the very first time. You find yourself back in that paper-making workshop, but now the Montgolfier brothers have moved beyond curious glances at smoke and tentative fires to conducting actual trials with their hot air balloons. Imagine the crisp morning air of June 1783 in Annonay as a crowd gathers around a simple contraption of fabric and paper stretched over a frame, tethered to the ground like an expectant pet. Joseph and Etienne stand nearby, holding their breath, though you suspect their nerves are far worse. These first tests weren't just casual tosses, they were carefully measured experiments. The balloon, filled with heated air, swelled slowly, its surface taut and shimmering in the sun. Then, almost imperceptibly, it began to rise, rising above the crowd, tether lines slackening, floating higher and higher until it disappeared into the blue. For the people watching, it was pure magic. For the brothers, it was proof that their idea could work. Historians still argue whether the balloon truly rose purely because of the heated air, or if some residual lighter gases played a role. But whatever the exact science, the event marked a turning point. The first recorded successful unmanned flight of a hot air balloon. It floated for about 10 minutes, covering roughly 2 kilometers before descending safely nearby. After that success, the brothers pushed forward with a series of increasingly ambitious tests. They built larger balloons experimenting with different shapes and materials, paper reinforced with fabric, then silk, trying to make something light yet durable. They even started to decorate their balloons, adding colorful motifs and messages that would float across the sky like airborne billboards. One quirky fact: they sometimes incorporated symbolic designs, including sun motifs and royal emblems, to curry favor with the French monarchy. These balloons were not just science, they were spectacle, steeped in the politics and pageantry of pre-revolutionary France. The Montgolfiers' experiments quickly caught the attention of Parisian elites and scientists. The French Academy of Sciences sent observers and skeptics alike, eager to scrutinize these strange flying machines. Some dismissed the balloons as theatrical tricks or humbugs, while others saw the potential to rewrite the rules of physics and transportation. What's fascinating is how the brothers balanced between being serious experimenters and showmen. Their public demonstrations were as much about inspiring awe and capturing the imagination as about gathering data. They knew the power of spectacle in an age before mass media, where a crowd's gasps and cheers were the viral buzz of the day. The physics behind these early flights was still murky. Without detailed instruments, the brothers relied on trial and error to understand how much heat was needed, how long the balloon could stay aloft, and how to prevent it from catching fire. They discovered that hot air needed to be continuously supplied and managed carefully, a tricky balancing act that pilots would struggle with for years. Some of these early flights ended in flames or rough landings, reminding everyone that this was dangerous territory. Still, the excitement outweighed the risks. The Montgolfier experiments weren't just advancing science. They were sparking a collective dream that humans might someday take to the skies. And here's a little-known tidbit. One of their early unmanned balloons was designed to release a dove upon landing as a symbol of peace. Imagine watching a balloon float away, then a tiny bird fluttering free. Pure poetry mingling with scientific wonder. By the time the brothers were ready to take their first manned flights, their public demonstrations had transformed ballooning into a social sensation. Nobles, scientists, and commoners alike looked up, wondering who would be the first to ride this strange, fiery beast into the air. The buzz from the Montgolfier brothers' successful unmanned flights ripples through France like wildfire, sweeping from the quiet village of Annonay to the glittering salons and opulent halls of Parisian royalty. Imagine yourself among the excited crowds packed into the Tuileries Gardens or the courtyard of Versailles, craning your neck to watch these curious flying machines prepare for their next, more ambitious demonstrations. The public spectacle is irresistible, like the first blockbuster movie or viral event before there were such things. A mixture of scientific breakthrough, theater, and sheer wonder. The balloon's ascent captures the imagination of elites, nobles, and the king himself, Louis XVI, who is intrigued enough to commission an official trial. You can almost hear the murmur of courtiers debating whether this is a frivolous distraction or a harbinger of technological revolution. The stakes are high. Success means glory for the Montgolfiers and prestige for the crown. Failure would be a public embarrassment. The French Academy of Sciences sends emissaries to scrutinize every detail, balancing scientific skepticism with genuine excitement. There's palpable tension as the brothers prepare to launch a larger balloon, this time with the explicit hope of carrying living creatures. Animal passengers would serve as proof of safety for eventual human flights. The choice of animals is symbolic. A sheep to represent the pastoral countryside, a rooster for its role in heralding dawn, and a duck, a natural flyer. Historians still argue whether this particular combination was chosen primarily for symbolic reasons or simply practicality, but the crowd's fascination with these feathered and furry passengers speaks to a broader cultural moment, one where science and spectacle blur. The animals are placed carefully in a small basket suspended beneath the balloon, which is now a massive, shimmering orb of silk and paper, emblazoned with royal insignias and Montgolfier motifs. The launch is a moment of breathtaking anticipation. The balloon fills slowly, the fire heating the air inside while the crowd watches, breath held. Then, like a great bubble released from the earth, it lifts smoothly, climbing into the azure sky. The animal's journey lasts about 8 minutes, soaring over Paris and landing safely on the outskirts. The success is met with cheers, relief, and a sense of shared triumph. Newspapers gush with excitement. Artists capture the scene in paintings, and poets compose verses about the daring journey. Ballooning is no longer just a curiosity. It's a cultural event with political and social weight. But this was also a calculated move by the monarchy to assert French scientific leadership and national pride. Royalty loved grand displays, and the Montgolfier brothers' balloon flights fit perfectly into this desire for spectacle and control. Political intrigue swirls around the events. Some nobles saw ballooning as a potential tool for espionage or military advantage, while others worried about the ethical implications of sending living creatures skyward. One of the more curious side notes: some Parisian gossipers whispered that the Montgolfier's success was a secret gift from the stars, while others feared the flights might anger the heavens. Such superstition persisted alongside scientific rationalism, showing how the public grappled with this new frontier. The brothers were aware of the power of their invention beyond science. Their balloons became symbols of human ingenuity, royal prestige, and the promise of a new age. Their launches were festive occasions with music, speeches, and lavish celebrations, blending Enlightenment ideals with courtly pomp. As the balloons continued to ascend, so did public hopes. The question shifted from "can it fly?" to "who will be the first to take the ultimate leap? Human flight?" The stage was set for an extraordinary moment in history where science, courage, and spectacle would converge in the skies above France. The day has arrived when the dream of human flight is about to take its first breath, and you find yourself in Paris, heart pounding with the crowd that's gathered near the Château de la Muette. The air is thick with anticipation and a faint scent of smoke and freshly tanned leather from the balloon's basket. You can almost taste the nervous excitement, like waiting for the first notes of a concert that could change everything. The Montgolfier brothers, now celebrities in their own right, have planned a daring experiment to send living passengers skyward for the first time. But not humans yet. Their test passengers are a motley trio: a sheep, a rooster, and a duck, carefully chosen for their symbolic and practical qualities. The sheep represents earthbound stability, the rooster signals the dawn of new beginnings, and the duck, of course, is a natural flyer, almost like a pilot in this makeshift crew. Historians still argue whether this particular combination was intended to ease fears by including a proven flyer alongside terrestrial animals, or if it was simply a whimsical choice by the brothers. Regardless, the public is captivated by this surreal menagerie preparing for flight. The animals are gently secured in a wicker basket attached beneath the balloon's enormous silk envelope, decorated with royal symbols and bright patterns. The crowd watches in hushed wonder as the fire beneath the balloon is lit, warming the air inside. Slowly the balloon swells, lifting gently off the ground. For about 8 minutes it ascends, drifting gracefully over the rooftops and gardens of Paris. You can imagine the sheep's bewildered eyes, the rooster's proud chest puffed up, and the duck's calm composure as they float above the city like pioneers of the skies. The balloon lands safely outside Paris, and the triumphant crew is returned unharmed, much to the relief of the audience. Buoyed by this success, the next step was inevitable. Humans would have to try. The first brave souls to volunteer were Jean-François Pilatre de Rosier, a chemistry teacher fascinated by gases, and François Laurent Darlande, a military officer with a taste for adventure. Their willingness to risk life and limb in the name of progress made them instant heroes and celebrities. Their first human flight took place on November 21st, 1783. You'd be standing among the tens of thousands lining the streets and gardens to watch history unfold. The balloon, a magnificent creation almost 23 meters tall, rises slowly, carrying Pilatre de Rosier and Darlandes into the sky for a 25-minute flight covering roughly 9 kilometers. For the first time, humans experience the world from above, a new perspective that would forever change how we see ourselves and our planet. The flight was not without danger. Pilatre de Rosier later died attempting to cross the English Channel in a hybrid balloon, highlighting the perilous nature of early aeronautics. Yet, that initial flight was a triumph, a milestone celebrated across Europe. This event ignited a surge of ballooning enthusiasm. Balloons appeared in art, literature, and popular culture, symbolizing progress, freedom, and human daring. But the public's reaction was mixed. While many marveled at the technological feat, some feared the implications. Would flying humans upset the natural order? Were we meddling with forces better left alone? A fringe but fascinating detail is that some clergy and philosophers debated whether balloon flight was an act of hubris, warning of divine punishment. Others embraced it as a sign of mankind's destiny to conquer nature. Meanwhile, the science of ballooning continued evolving. Pilots experimented with altitudes, flight durations, and the limits of hot air and hydrogen balloons. Pilatre de Rosier's efforts bridged the gap between scientific exploration and the very human urge to adventure, setting the tone for aviation's future. So, as you drift off tonight, picture yourself gently lifted in that basket, gazing down at the patchwork fields and city streets below, feeling the thrill and terror of the very first human ascent into the sky. It's a moment of wonder and fragility, one where the sky opens up to human dreams and questions alike. You're now floating in the hazy space where science meets superstition, a place where balloons weren't just technological wonders but also symbols, tangled with folklore and fear. The year is still 1783, but ballooning's success has sent ripples far beyond scientific circles, into the hearts and minds of everyday people who watch these strange flying machines with awe and sometimes dread. Imagine the murmurings in taverns and marketplaces as the Montgolfier balloons drift across the sky. To some, they are harbingers of progress, miraculous machines promising to lift humanity beyond earthly bounds. But to others, they evoke unease. How could fire, that destructive force, be harnessed safely to carry life into the open air? What unseen powers were at play? Public reaction was a curious cocktail of excitement and superstition. In some rural French villages, balloons were seen as signs or omens, sometimes good, sometimes bad. One popular belief was that these flying orbs could carry souls or spirits away, or even summon divine wrath. You might chuckle now at the idea, but at the time, these were serious concerns. Historians still argue whether the balloon mania sparked more rational enlightenment or renewed old fears. It was a clash of worldviews, the age of reason versus deeply rooted folklore. Clerics preached caution, warning that humans were overstepping their bounds. Some even suggested that the balloons were invitations to angels or demons, creating a cosmic tug-of-war in the public imagination. The mix of science and superstition wasn't just a rural phenomenon. In cities, pamphlets and broadsheets both celebrated the feats and warned of the consequences. One notable example was a satirical poem suggesting that the Montgolfier brothers' balloons were fiery chariots that might one day burn the heavens themselves. Such fears often mingled with laughter and awe, illustrating how new technologies can disrupt old narratives. Meanwhile, the scientific community worked hard to separate fact from fiction. Demonstrations became public lessons, with experts explaining the principles of heated air and buoyancy, attempting to soothe fears with knowledge. Yet, even within the Academy of Sciences, some members remained skeptical, debating the safety and practicality of balloon flight. You might find it amusing that some early balloon pilots wore talismans or charms, blending superstition with science in a way that reminds you of athletes wearing lucky socks. This human touch highlights the tension between fear and curiosity in those early days of flight. The spectacle of balloon launches also became opportunities for social commentary and political satire. Caricatures depicted balloons as royal hot air, literally and figuratively, mocking the monarchy and the extravagance of science-funded spectacles. These images circulated widely, influencing public opinion and shaping ballooning's cultural footprint. As balloon flights grew more frequent, authorities began to worry about their potential uses and misuses. Would balloons be spies? Weapons? Tools of the elite to escape the common people? Such questions added layers of intrigue and caution to the public debate. Through it all, ballooning retained a magical quality, a blending of human ingenuity with elements beyond immediate understanding. It was a step into the unknown, both exhilarating and unsettling. So, as you settle deeper into your pillow tonight, let yourself drift between the realms of reason and myth, where early balloon flights floated not just in the sky, but in the dreams and fears of a society on the brink of transformation. The Montgolfier brothers' fiery invention didn't stay confined to France for long. Like wildfire carried on the wind, ballooning swiftly spread across Europe, capturing imaginations and igniting a competitive spirit among nations eager to stake their claim in the new frontier of flight. Imagine yourself in London's green parks or Venice's grand piazzas, where crowds gather just as excitedly as in Paris, waiting to see these floating marvels grace their skies. England, in particular, took ballooning to heart with a mix of scientific enthusiasm and national pride. British experimenters replicated and adapted the Montgolfier's designs while adding their own twists. Some even introduced hydrogen gas balloons, which could float higher and longer than hot air models, but were far trickier to handle due to the explosive nature of hydrogen. The British were quick to see ballooning as not just a novelty, but a potential symbol of industrial and scientific advancement. Italy's contribution to ballooning was no less passionate. In Venice, for instance, the serene canals became an ironic backdrop to the skyward ambitions of early aeronauts, who held public balloon launches that combined spectacle and science. Ballooning festivals attracted tourists and nobles, turning the sky into a stage for national pride. Historians still debate the extent to which ballooning's rapid European spread was fueled by pure scientific exchange versus national rivalry. Some argue it was a unifying symbol of the Enlightenment's spirit of discovery, while others see it as a contest where countries vied for prestige and technological superiority. This competitive spread wasn't without its quirks. There are stories of balloon designs being copied or borrowed without credit, and of fierce rivalries between balloonists who raced to be first or highest. The race to conquer the skies had all the drama of a reality TV competition, only with a lot more fire and occasional crashes. On a lighter note, some balloonists took the opportunity to stage theatrical flights, carrying musicians or actors aloft to perform mid-air concerts or dramas. It was ballooning's version of going viral before the internet, a mix of daring, showmanship, and a little bit of madness. This period also saw the beginnings of organized balloon clubs and societies, which codified best practices and shared knowledge. Pilots traded tips on handling winds, controlling altitude, and managing fuel, all vital in a time when every flight was an experiment on the edge. One fascinating fringe detail is that some early balloonists carried unusual payloads, everything from live animals to strange contraptions intended to test atmospheric conditions. A few even attempted to take seeds and plants aloft to study their survival, a sort of proto-ecological experiment. By the end of this European ballooning craze, the skies above major cities had become a sort of open-air laboratory and theater combined, where science and spectacle mingled freely. Ballooning was no longer just French. It was an international phenomenon that hinted at a shared human desire to rise above limitations and glimpse the world from new heights. So, as you drift off, imagine the fluttering silk balloons crossing borders, uniting curious minds across Europe under one sky, each country adding its own chapter to the unfolding story of flight. Now you're soaring with those early balloonists as they face the exhilarating and sometimes terrifying challenge of control and navigation. Picture the sky as a vast, unpredictable ocean, where the wind is the only captain, and your balloon is a fragile, fire-lit vessel at its mercy. The dream of piloting these floating crafts was intoxicating, but the reality was far trickier than it seemed. From the very beginning, balloon pilots discovered that steering a balloon was not like rowing a boat or driving a carriage. Once aloft, you were largely at the whim of the wind. The early hot air balloons had no engines, no rudders, no real means of control beyond adjusting altitude by managing the heat inside the envelope. You could climb or descend to catch different air currents, but horizontal navigation was mostly guesswork. Historians still argue whether early attempts at steering were naive optimism or ingenious improvisations. Some pilots believed that by changing altitude they could steer by finding different wind directions, but wind layers often behaved unpredictably. One famous balloonist remarked that flying was more like dancing with the sky than piloting a vehicle. Pilots quickly learned the importance of weather knowledge and atmospheric conditions. Too much heat and your balloon risked bursting into flames. Too little and you'd plummet back to Earth unexpectedly. Monitoring wind shifts became a critical skill, and many flights were cut short by sudden storms or gusts that sent balloons off course, sometimes disastrously. A quirky tidbit: early balloonists sometimes carried instruments that today seem primitive, like barometers and thermometers, to help anticipate changes in altitude and weather. Some even took along pigeons, hoping they'd help navigate by flying toward home, though the idea was more hopeful than practical. Control issues sparked numerous close calls and unexpected landings. Balloons occasionally crashed into trees, buildings, or bodies of water. There are tales of pilots landing in fields full of startled livestock or inadvertently trespassing onto private estates, causing no small amount of alarm and occasional legal disputes. You can almost picture a balloon drifting over a village with farmers pointing and shaking their fists. Still, the thrill of flight and the potential for discovery kept pilots returning to the skies. The challenge of control inspired inventors to dream up steering mechanisms, paddle wheels, rudders, and even oars. Though none proved truly effective at the time, it would take decades before powered flight would finally give pilots true command of their direction. The limitations of balloon navigation also fueled debates about their usefulness. Could these fragile machines ever become practical tools for transport or military reconnaissance if they couldn't be reliably steered? Military leaders were intrigued but cautious, balancing excitement with skepticism. In the meantime, balloonists became masters of improvisation and survival, learning to read the winds and terrain, and often relying on local guides to help after unexpected landings. The open sky was a wild frontier, beautiful but unforgiving. So, as you imagine yourself floating in that wicker basket tonight, feel the tug of the wind, the flicker of flame below, and the exhilarating uncertainty of a voyage where control is elusive, and every breath of air is a new adventure. As ballooning became more than just a spectacle, it also blossomed into a valuable tool for science, opening up perspectives previously unimaginable. Imagine yourself perched high above the ground, looking down on the patchwork quilt of fields, rivers, and towns below. Now your vantage point is not just for thrill, but for knowledge. This elevated perspective allowed balloonists to contribute to the growing fields of meteorology, physics, and even early aerial photography. Meteorologists found balloons invaluable for studying the atmosphere. Before this, weather was mostly guessed from surface observations. cloud shapes, wind shifts, and temperature changes at ground level. But balloon flights let scientists ascend into the sky to measure temperature, pressure, and humidity at different altitudes. This was revolutionary, providing data to understand storms, wind currents, and the mysterious layers of the atmosphere. A quirky fact is that some early balloonists carried barometers and thermometers that would occasionally freeze at high altitudes or malfunction due to pressure changes, leading to some puzzling readings. They learned quickly that the atmosphere wasn't uniform and that conditions could change dramatically just a few hundred meters above the Earth. Early aerial photography, albeit rudimentary, also began to emerge. Balloonists attached cameras to their baskets, attempting to capture images from above. These were some of the first photographs to show the world from a bird's eye view, a perspective that would later transform geography, urban planning, and even art. Imagine those early grainy images, rough, mysterious, and awe-inspiring, capturing towns and rivers like never before. Historians still argue how much ballooning directly influenced the development of meteorology versus coinciding with other scientific advances. What's clear, though, is that the experience of flight changed scientists' understanding of the atmosphere and helped shift weather forecasting from superstition to a more empirical science. In physics, the principles demonstrated by hot air balloons, buoyancy, pressure, and temperature relationships, became textbook examples. Balloon flights were practical experiments proving concepts that until then had been theoretical. They showed how gases expand when heated and how this affects density, helping to cement foundational ideas in thermodynamics. You might be amused to know that some early physicists joked about air with a mind of its own, referencing the whimsical behavior of balloons drifting unpredictably, as if the air itself was playing a trick. This mix of serious science and lighthearted commentary reflected the excitement and challenges of exploring a new frontier. Moreover, balloon flights prompted discussions about the nature of altitude sickness and human physiology at heights never before reached. Balloonists reported symptoms like headaches, dizziness, and nausea, early observations that would inform later studies on oxygen deprivation and adaptation. So, as you relax tonight, picture yourself suspended in the quiet sky, a pioneer gathering data where none had gone before. Each ascent was a small step for human knowledge, lifting us not just physically but intellectually, revealing new horizons of understanding from the fragile basket of a hot air balloon. The soaring success of balloons soon caught the eye of political and military strategists, who began envisioning these fiery orbs not just as marvels of science but as tools of power and warfare. Imagine the swirling discussions in royal courts and war rooms across Europe, where generals and monarchs debated how to use balloons for spying on enemies, sending messages, or even dropping payloads from the sky. During the French Revolutionary Wars, balloons were quickly adapted for reconnaissance. The French army deployed a tethered balloon called the Entreprenant in 1794 to observe enemy troop movements during the Battle of Fleurus. Picture soldiers craning their necks upward to watch this strange flying lookout, which gave French commanders a crucial advantage. It was one of the first times aerial surveillance was used in battle, a radical shift in military tactics. Historians still argue how decisive balloon reconnaissance really was in warfare. Some say it was a game changer, while others believe its impact was limited by technical constraints and the novelty of the technology. Regardless, balloons planted the seed for modern aerial reconnaissance and surveillance. Political leaders also saw balloons as potent symbols of national pride and propaganda. Balloons adorned with flags and emblems became airborne billboards, asserting technological dominance and inspiring patriotism. Public balloon launches were orchestrated to rally support and boost morale, blurring lines between spectacle and political messaging. But the military use of balloons also raised ethical debates. Was it acceptable to use these machines to spy on civilians or enemy forces? Could balloons be weaponized, dropping bombs or incendiary devices? Early experiments with payload drops were clumsy and often dangerous, but they foreshadowed later developments in aerial warfare. On a fringe note, some balloon enthusiasts proposed bizarre ideas like using balloons to release poisonous gases or deploy nets to capture enemy aircraft. Concepts that seem straight out of a steampunk novel but reveal the imaginative scope of early military thinking. Despite their promise, balloons face significant limitations in military contexts. Their lack of steering made them vulnerable to weather and enemy fire, and tethered balloons were limited in range. Still, their psychological impact was undeniable. Imagine enemy troops looking up nervously, uncertain of what fiery orb might be watching from above. The use of balloons also sparked a broader conversation about the relationship between technology and power. Would the control of the skies become the new frontier of warfare and diplomacy? Could balloons democratize information or reinforce hierarchies? As you settle deeper into the quiet of the night, reflect on how these fragile, fire-lit spheres became instruments not just of discovery, but of conflict and control. A reminder that every new technology carries both promise and peril, soaring hopes and shadowed fears. As balloons drifted higher into the public imagination, they also became the playground for some of the most curious and eccentric experiments of the age. Ventures where whimsy met audacity and human imagination pushed the boundaries of what was possible or at least plausible. Picture yourself at a bustling 18th century fair where, alongside scientific demonstrations, balloonists dazzled crowds with oddball creations that stretched the limits of early aviation. Some inventors dreamed of floating theaters where audiences would watch plays or musical performances suspended in the sky. Imagine a tiny stage suspended beneath a balloon, actors delivering lines while the world below grew smaller, a spectacle both thrilling and absurd. While no such airborne theater ever truly took off, pun intended, the idea reveals the spirit of playfulness mixed with scientific ambition. Then there were the bizarre payloads, balloons carrying everything from live animals, including cats and dogs, to delicate scientific instruments designed to measure atmospheric conditions. A few attempted to send letter-bearing balloons across long distances, early ancestors of airmail, though controlling delivery was a huge challenge. Historians still argue whether some of these fringe experiments advanced ballooning technology or simply served as entertainment. But these ventures highlight the blurred line between science and showmanship, where the desire to astonish often drove innovation as much as practical goals did. One particularly quirky invention was the flying pharmacy, a balloon intended to deliver medicines to remote or inaccessible places. While it never became widespread, the concept anticipated modern ideas about airborne delivery and humanitarian aid. Some balloonists even attempted to equip their crafts with rudimentary steering devices, paddle wheels, sails, or small rudders, hoping to tame the winds. Most were ineffective, but these experiments laid the groundwork for future advances in controlled flight. The public's fascination with these eccentric flights was sometimes tinged with skepticism or amusement. Satirical cartoons depicted balloonists as mad scientists or showmen, and newspapers often mixed serious reporting with sensationalized accounts of crashes or bizarre balloon behavior. Despite the occasional mishap or absurdity, these fringe ventures contributed to a culture of experimentation that kept ballooning dynamic and evolving. They reminded everyone that flight wasn't just about practical transportation. It was also a canvas for creativity and human daring. So, as you imagine drifting gently above the Earth tonight, think of those early balloonists not only as pioneers of science, but also as playful adventurers, whose flights were as much about exploring the limits of imagination as the atmosphere. The story of ballooning isn't just about daring men floating skyward. It also carries the often overlooked tales of women who defied social norms to join this high-flying adventure. Imagine a time when societal expectations tethered most women firmly to the ground, yet some dared to ascend, literally and figuratively, challenging gender roles and expectations in the process. The first women balloonists emerged in the late 18th century, stepping into baskets that carried them beyond the constraints of tradition. Jeanne Labrosse, one of the earliest, made headlines for her solo flights, becoming a symbol of courage and independence. Her flights weren't just daring feats, They were acts of subtle rebellion against a society that doubted women's capabilities in science and exploration. Historians still argue how much these early women balloonists influenced the broader women's rights movements, but their flights undeniably challenged prevailing ideas about gender and physicality. Ballooning provided a rare space where women could demonstrate strength, skill, and bravery publicly. Women often faced significant barriers, social skepticism, limited access to training, and sometimes outright hostility. Yet they persevered, with some even becoming instructors or organizers within ballooning circles. Their involvement helped slowly reshape public perceptions of women's roles in science and adventure. A quirky anecdote: some women balloonists carried elaborate parasols or wore fashionable dresses that made flying precarious but undeniably stylish. Imagine the delicate balance of silk gowns and wicker baskets, wind-whipping fabric in a blend of elegance and danger. Ballooning also intersected with broader cultural shifts. As Enlightenment ideals spread, ideas about education and equality began to surface, and women's participation in balloon flights symbolized these changing tides. Balloon rides were often social events where class and gender lines blurred, at least briefly, as everyone shared the wonder of the ascent. Still, public reactions to women balloonists were mixed. Some lauded their bravery, while others criticized their defiance of natural roles. Newspapers and pamphlets sometimes framed women's flights as spectacles or novelties rather than serious scientific endeavors. By the 19th century, women balloonists had established a foothold in the aerial world, paving the way for future generations of female aviators. Their flights were small but significant steps in a longer journey toward equality and recognition. So tonight, as you drift off into your own gentle ascent, remember those early women who looked up at the sky, untied the ropes of expectation, and soared, carrying not just themselves but the hopes of many into the air. By the time ballooning had soared into public consciousness, it became a staple subject for the media frenzy of the day. Newspapers, pamphlets, and artists eagerly captured balloon flights, shaping public perception through a blend of fact, exaggeration, and sometimes outright myth. Imagine yourself leafing through a period newspaper where balloon launches are front-page news, alongside equally sensational headlines about politics and scandal. Ballooning's early successes sparked a media gold rush. Illustrations of enormous, colorful balloons drifting over famous landmarks appeared alongside dramatic accounts of daring pilots and close calls. Artists portrayed balloons as majestic or mysterious, casting them in heroic light or as symbols of impending doom. This sensationalism fed public fascination, but also blurred the line between reality and fantasy. One popular myth was that balloons could reach the moon or even travel into the sun, a wild exaggeration, but one that captured imaginations and inspired both awe and skepticism. Some satirical cartoons showed balloonists accidentally floating off into space, mixing humor with the era's scientific curiosity. Historians still debate how these media portrayals influenced public attitudes. Did sensationalism encourage interest and investment in ballooning? Or did it create unrealistic expectations and fears? Likely both, as the media helped ballooning become not just a technological development, but a cultural phenomenon. This media frenzy also gave rise to hoaxes and scams. Some unscrupulous showmen claimed to have built indestructible balloons or promised impossible flights to new continents, luring gullible investors and audiences. These frauds, while rare, added a note of caution to the public's balloon fever. The balloon craze spilled into literature and art, too. Writers wove balloon flights into novels and poems, often as metaphors for freedom, exploration, or the folly of human ambition. Painters depicted them in landscapes that blended realism with romanticism, highlighting the strange beauty of these floating orbs against the sky. Interestingly, some artists used balloon imagery to comment on social and political issues. Balloons represented Enlightenment ideals, rising above ignorance, or served as metaphors for revolutionary change, especially as Europe teetered on the brink of political upheaval. Public balloon launches were often accompanied by crowds, music, and festive celebrations, turning them into major social events. These occasions were as much about spectacle and community as about science, blending education with entertainment. As you rest tonight, imagine the colorful images, poetic verses, and lively crowds that surrounded these early flights, reminding you that ballooning wasn't just a technical breakthrough, it was a story told, retold, and imagined, floating on the winds of culture and creativity. The story of the hot air balloon is not just a tale of fiery ascent, but the first chapter in humanity's long romance with flight, a romance that continues to evolve and inspire. From those fragile, paper-thin balloons soaring above 18th century France to the complex aircraft that crisscross our skies today, the legacy of those first flights echoes through history. Imagine yourself back in that wicker basket, feeling the warmth of the flame below and the gentle tug of the wind, knowing you're part of a monumental human adventure. The hot air balloon was a proof of concept, a spark that ignited centuries of innovation. It showed that with ingenuity and daring, humans could lift themselves beyond the ground, challenging gravity and expanding horizons. The Montgolfier brothers' invention set the stage for later breakthroughs. The hydrogen balloons, dirigibles, gliders, and eventually the powered airplanes that transformed transportation and warfare, shrunk the world and redefined possibilities. Their flights inspired generations of inventors, scientists, and adventurers who pushed flight from spectacle to necessity. Historians still debate the exact path from hot air balloons to modern aviation, but there's no doubt that those early ascents expanded human understanding of physics, meteorology, and the very nature of exploration. Ballooning introduced the idea that the sky was not a limit, but a new domain to explore. The cultural legacy of balloons also persists. Today, hot air balloon festivals draw crowds worldwide, blending celebration, sport, and nostalgia. They remind us of the humble origins of flight and the eternal human desire to rise and see the world anew. As the night deepens, imagine the glowing balloon lanterns drifting above peaceful fields, their soft light echoing the pioneering spirit of Joseph and Etienne Montgolfier. Their dream was not just about rising, but about expanding the human spirit. So, as you settle in, feel the gentle lift of history beneath you, the shared dreams, failures, and triumphs of countless souls who looked up and decided to fly. The sky may be vast, but it is also a place of connection, wonder, and endless possibility. As the flame in the basket dims and the balloon drifts softly toward a quiet landing, let yourself relax into the calm embrace of the night. The winds carry away the excitement, leaving behind a gentle stillness. The world beneath you fades into a patchwork of shadows, the stars twinkling softly as guardians of your dreams. You are safe, suspended in a timeless moment where past and present meet, cradled by the vast, silent sky. Breathe deeply. Feel your body lighten as your thoughts drift like the balloon, slow and steady. Each breath softens the edges of the day, and your mind opens to the soothing rhythm of night. The daring flights of the past have passed, but their spirit remains. A quiet reminder that every journey, no matter how bold, begins with a single gentle lift. Rest now, knowing that the sky is always waiting for your return. Sweet dreams.